Do not change the station. What you're hearing is coming from the Big Sci-Fi Podcast and the Trek Geeks Podcast Network. Stay tuned for the next exciting episode of... Wait a minute. Receiving a new transmission. What is that? What am I seeing? It's big. It's really big. Oh my God, it's so... Welcome to Season 6 of the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, the biggest sci-fi podcast in the galaxy. Join our crew, Adina, Brian, Cris, and Steve, as we travel the Milky Way looking for the best that science fiction has to offer. Make sure you're strapped in tight, because we're going to have a lot of fun talking all things sci-fi. Stay tuned to this channel for the next audio transmission.
Greetings, listeners of the Big Sci-Fi Podcast. We want to welcome you to today's episode where we're venturing into some of my favorite discussions, the fascinating intersection of science fiction and science fact, with a very special guest, Dr. Mohamed Noor. As a professor of biology at Duke University, Dr. Noor not only educates the next generation of scientists, but also leads cutting-edge research in genetics and evolution. His passion for making science accessible and engaging is evident in all of his activities, to include using Star Trek to teach complex scientific concepts. His book, Live Long and Evolve: What Star Trek Can Teach Us About Evolution, Genetics, and Life on Other Worlds, showcases this innovative approach. And that's not all. His expertise has been recognized in the Star Trek universe itself, where he has served as a scientific consultant for Star Trek Discovery Seasons 3 and 4, some Star Trek Prodigy, and even some yet-to-come-out Strange New Worlds. So today, we'll explore how Dr. Noor uses our beloved Star Trek to illuminate the realities of science, and perhaps we'll even discover what the future of genetics and evolution might hold. Dr. Noor, welcome to the Big Sci-Fi.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
We are so happy to have you too. Well, the first thing I really would love to know is just when did you discover Star Trek and how did you become a Trekkie?
Sure. So by recollection, that it's hard when we're thinking back to times when we were like 8 years old or something like that. My recollection, though, is that there was a trip I took with my parents, and it was something around 8. We went to Miami, and we were staying with some friends of my parents. And I think I had heard of Star Trek, but I didn't really know what it was, and I hadn't watched it on TV. And they had it on their TV, and I remember what the episode was. The episode was an original series episode because, I'm just over 50. The original series episode that was airing at the time was For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky. I remember thinking, like, this is really interesting, right? It's really good. It's really interesting. Like, there's this whole group of people and they don't understand where they are. And there's this danger. And there's all these sort of underpinnings in terms of, their understanding of the world around them versus the Enterprise's understanding of the world around them. Fascinating. So went back home after that. I was like, I need to find this Star Trek thing. And I remember at the time, like, I had heard of Mr. Spock, but at the time I would always get him confused with Dr. Benjamin Spock, the child psychiatrist. So I finally got it down after that. And then honestly, I've been watching everything since it came out from that time on. So I missed the original series first. I mean, I wasn't alive when it first aired, but then I missed the animated series. I actually only saw that recently, but all the things that came, like, the Wrath of Khan, all those movies until Next Generation, and then all the series after that, I've been watching them as they aired.
So what got you into biology? Was it science fiction like Star Trek, or some other path took you into biology?
Yeah, it's hard to remember a specific point where I first decided I wanted to go into biology. I actually recently found my 7th grade yearbook, which is the first start of middle school for me in my school system. And in there, actually, one of the people is this kid named Donnie Oliveira. He actually wrote in there, someday you'll be a great biologist. So clearly at that point in time, I was already telling people I wanted to be a biologist. I don't remember a starting point. I think I just always loved animals. I always loved being outside and things like that. So I think it was just already there from day one. I used to catch, June bugs outside, and then I'd bring them in. I'd say, let me see if I freeze it and bring it back to life after that. Things like
that. Well, that's fantastic. So it's been a part of you, even to the point of not necessarily knowing like a clear start, but reading. That's fantastic. Reading in a yearbook that someone said that's just
in 7th grade. Story. Yeah, no, I know it's going way back for that. And I love my 7th grade biology teacher, Mr. Berryman. He was great.
Cool.
When you started college, was it like, did you think like, what have I got myself into? Looking at the science, the math, everything involved, or did you go like, no, I'm embracing this. This is going to be exciting. I can't wait.
That's a brilliant question, Steve. Honestly, I was a little disenchanted when I first started college because so much of it, this was a little bit true in high school too, so much of it, and the way it was presented, this ties back to Adina's one very generous introduction. So much of it was memorizing. Memorize the steps of the Krebs cycle. Memorize all these different phyla. Memorize all, and it's like, this is so not that exciting at that point. So while I was in college, I actually wavered a little bit, and I even briefly started toying with maybe I should major in psychology. I'm really enjoying that much more. It seems like it's more process oriented. And the point where I came back was junior year in college. I actually had put off taking genetics because everybody said it's really hard. And then I finally took it. And I was like, this is amazing. This is really cool. I mean, I like the sort of problem solving aspect to it. And then the next semester I took evolutionary genetics, and then I was just sold. I used to record the class with my little tape recorder. And when I go to work out, I was like, I want to hear it again. I just want to hear the lecture again. It wasn't even like I needed to take notes again. I mean, I took plenty good notes, but I just wanted to hear it again because it was so interesting. I'm still in touch with that professor. So I graduated college in 1992. I'd say every 3 to 4 weeks, I get an email from that professor. and
Wow.
we trade.
That's great.
He's also a big Trekkie. So we'd also talk a lot about Star Trek at the time.
Nice.
We talk about like, I can't believe this episode of Next Generation. Why did Dr. Crusher say blah, blah, blah?
Well, you're hooked on something too when you listen to it when you work out. You only listen to things you really love when you're working out. So
yeah.
Well, so you mentioned, Dr. Crusher, whenever I hear now biology, evolution, genetics, and Dr. Crusher, I'm thinking of the episode that Gates McFadden directed, Genesis.
Oh.
Which I have a new appreciation since I learned that she directed it. And on the cruise, she hosted kind of an evening where she broke it down from a director point of view. Mm-hmm. And from that point of view, I like to appreciate the episode. Mm-hmm. But what do you think of it from that whole evolutionary? What is the hot take on that episode?
Yeah, I mean, of course, well, obviously fiction. So we have to give it a little bit. And it's a fun story. So story-wise, it's interesting. It's a little bit of the typical sort of monster thing, but there's interesting twist to it. There's a lot of interesting parts that are valid. There's some good attempts, and then there's some common misconceptions, right? For all those things, right? So, looking at this, viral spread kind of thing. I mean, there was some weird comment about like T cells or something like that, which I didn't quite understand what was going on there. But, obviously, like you can have viral spread, you can have this sort of pandemic thing, which is kind of what happened there. There was an attempt to explain what was happening by data where he said something about how, what's happening here is you're activating the introns, and that's what's making them revert to past states. And he defined introns as things that used to have a function but no longer do. That's actually not the definition of an intron. That's actually the definition of a pseudogene, but it was close.
Interesting.
I mean, there are sometimes pseudogenes in introns. I mean, there was things where like you could tell it was somebody who had read biology or consulted with a biologist, but didn't directly know all the specifics. But fair. I mean, if I try to do physics, it'd be terrible. So I mean, fair that it was one of those close. It was interesting to introduce this concept, and it's true. We do have pseudogenes. We have things that are no longer functional in our bodies that in our evolutionary ancestors used to have function. So a great example is the vitamin C gene. We have to have vitamin C in our diets. Your dog does not. Your dog produces its own vitamin C. We have that gene, but it's broken, right? So it's considered a pseudogene. Now, turning it on is not going to help because I mean, then I'm going to make this like weird protein that doesn't make vitamin C. So there's some misconceptions there that like, would this make you revert? No, it won't make you revert. And generally speaking, these sort of pseudogenes, after a long period of evolution, so Troy was going back to an amphibian state and things like that. After a long period of evolution, those pseudogenes are just so mutated out. There's no way you're going to pull back some of those traits. Now, it is possible you could imagine sort of reversions that could happen. So, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say there's zero probability that any specific aspect of it could work. I wouldn't go that far. So, I mean, there's elements of truth, there's elements of sort of slight misunderstanding, and then there's common misconception. So that's what I say is the overall thing. But good attempt. 2 thumbs up for trying.
Stepping away from Star Trek for a moment.
Sure.
There was an episode of The Outer Limits from the 1960s called The Six Finger, where scientist creates a machine that is able to accelerate the genetic in someone or reverse it. And so you see the main character, go through, he's an itinerant coal worker in Ireland, and he is evoluted into a person where he has a 6 finger and a large head and great cranium and intelligence. And it's if you can find it, which I'm sure you can, you'd really enjoy it from that point of view.
Interesting. It's got that almost threshold-like aspect to it too.
Is evoluted a word?
No, that's okay. It's evolved. That's okay.
Well, no, we're allowed to make up words. As a writer, we're allowed to make up words.
Yeah, I'll take it. It's a cool word. I'll take it.
It did sound really cool. So I was hoping it was a word.
Yeah, there's a simple mutation too for polydactyly, which would give the 6 fingers. So that's actually not that hard.
One of my cousins was born with 6 fingers and 6 toes on each of his feet, and at birth, like right after birth, they removed.
Yeah, that's usually what happens.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now I would like to make a comment about the episode Genesis, because I had kind of a weird take on it originally, because I watched all of Next Gen when it all originally aired. I was religiously at my television with my VCR recording every Saturday night, channel 43 WUAB in Cleveland. When Genesis came on, because the 7th season, it had some gems, but it was it also was kind of not quite, in my opinion, hitting on all cylinders like previous. So Genesis came out. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of fun. I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a monster thing too. Mm-hmm. Oh, they need to start making movies real quick. That's kind of my take when that came out. I'm like, this is cool, but at the same time, oh yeah, let's make some movies here, guys.
Well, one of the challenging things with so many of these shows too is the speed of change idea, right? That it's not like Picard was gone for a month. I mean, he was gone for a couple of days and he came back, and everybody had changed radically. Like how would it be that fast? Like that, your rate of cell division would have to be so high. The other thing too is it was interesting that like everybody had a different outcome. So I was trying to think, like, was it? If it's activating the intron, is it activating different? I mean, again, the intron thing doesn't really work, but let's say it's pseudogenes. Is it activating different pseudogenes in everybody? Why aren't they all going the same direction? Like
that was the thing that I remember confusing me at the time, is because Worf is he's a Klingon and transferring into something that, right. Nurse Ogawa, she's becoming more, some kind of simian-like, which I expect. But then when they had, and Troy becoming amphibian, I was associating that with her Betazoid part. But then when you have Barclay kind of become like a spider, I'm like, are they trying to tell us that he's not entirely human? That was like, I was really confused about that.
The spider piece is interesting too, because that also reflects a common misconception. We have no spider ancestors, period.
That's why I was like, so are they trying to tell us that he's not human?
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because like we share common ancestors with spiders, but none of those ancestors were spiders, just like none of those ancestors were human. So that, again, that's another common misconception there. So I mean, again, I don't blame somebody who's not an evolutionary biologist, because they don't think about that kind of thing. They're like, oh, I'm just trying to put this together. So if you're a writer or a physicist or something like that, you're going to try to make it work, and story has to trump science. That's true for all sci-fi, right? Yeah. And then it's not an episode of Nova. It's an episode of Star Trek.
Makeup guy said, "Hey, let's try a spider now."
Yeah.
Let's see.
It was cool. It was cool.
It looked fantastic.
Yeah, and the web everywhere was neat effect and stuff. So and the jump scare for Picard as he was being Nemo-like.
That was good.
Yeah.
So I've heard you say that line before, story trumps the science.
Yeah.
So that to me is a great transition to now. So you'd watched a bunch of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And then eventually you became one of those consultants on Star Trek. And well, one, how did that happen? And then now what's that like to be on the side of like, hey guys, this is the right way, you're doing it the wrong, like how does that all happen? And how
let me break it down. So your first question was how did it come together? So I had several times tweeted at the writers and said like, hey, if you ever want any help, I'm happy to help out. Go figure, random person tweeting at them didn't bring it in. What actually worked really well for me, and this was totally a random event, I was at Dragon Con, which is the big con over in Atlanta. It's every Labor Day weekend. And I think it was 2018, I believe. Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it was Dragon Con 2018. And I was giving a talk with Dr. Aaron McDonald, who was my friend, because we'd met at Dragon Con in previous years. And we said, well, let's do a science in Star Trek Discovery talk together. And I'll talk about she'll talk about the physics side. I talk about the biology side. So we did that. And Aaron was friends with Mary Chieffo, who plays L'Rell. So Mary told her friends, Jane Brooke and Ken Mitchell, said, hey, my friend Aaron McDonald, or Dr. Aaron McDonald is giving this talk. Let's go. So they actually came, they sat in the back of the room as we gave this talk on the science of in Star Trek Discovery. And at the end, I remember Ken Mitchell raised his hand. He was always a goofball. I loved him. He asked this like very silly question, like, please tell me how I can sweat this much without drinking anything. So that's a funny question. So of course everybody turned around like, oh my gosh, the actors are here. But in the Q&A, after the Q&A session was over, people often walk up to the front and say, I want to ask people questions. Jane walked up to me and she said, hey, I was a Duke graduate. And I was like, oh, really? So, we got to talking. We like traded contact information. I actually invited her to come to Duke at one point in time too. We got to be friends, and she actually got a copy of the book. So the book that you mentioned at the very beginning, Adina, thank you for that plug, by the way. Jane had gone through it, like, she's amazing. She had gone through it like page by page and had all these comments and questions throughout the whole thing. So she came like really all over this. And she said, like, this is amazing. Like, do you have any interest in like, helping out with series? Like, I would love to, but there's not been any update. So she connected me with one of the writers, Erica Lippold, and I had a great chat with her. Erica, by the way, has a PhD in molecular biology too. So she's very much along the same lines there. She knows this stuff very well. And Erica then connected me with Michelle Paradise, who is the showrunner. And, I had a great chat with her. And then Michelle contacted me. This was a little bit later in 2019. She said, actually, we have a plot that I think you'd be really helpful for. We need somebody who has a good knowledge of sort of evolution and genetics. And we want to pair you with somebody. There's a physicist that we've met that we want to have you help out with. Her name is Dr. Erin McDonald. Not knowing her. I know her very well. Like, I have her number on my cell phone. We've been friends for years.
Fantastic.
So we were both like, in that sense, at that year, we were both contracted. Since that time, Dr. Erin McDonald has become like the science advisor for the franchise. So she actually is on retainer from Star Trek. I like to say she's the sheriff of science in Star Trek, and I'm somebody who's just a deputy. So I'm still, honestly, so you asked how it is, Adina. Mm-hmm. It is like the biggest honor to be able to like write a couple of words that then Sonequa Martin Green reads out on the show, like, boom, a head explosion.
So do they give you like a script and they tell you, look at this, look at what is that process like?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different possibilities. So the lowest thing, or the lowest meaning like simplest, would be along the lines of what you just said. Like there's a line here in a script, check this line. Does this make sense? So usually when that happens now, it's usually Dr. Erin McDonald, since she's actually on retainer, she'll just reach out to me and be like, is this line okay? I often have to reach back out to her and be like, tell me the context, because I don't want to just say yes and it's like, actually in the broader context, that makes no sense. So that's sort of the simplest. And in between might be like, there's an episode plot. So for example, in season 3 of Discovery, episode 5, I think it was, the one with the seed ship, right? They had a couple of things associated with that, where they wanted to talk about like how how going to the seed ship would actually help find a cure for these refugee aliens or something like that. So that was more an episode plot, and there was a couple of like, tell us like, how would you science this problem out? This is the goal we have. We need them to have to be able to go to the seed ship and get the seeds. That will help in some way understand what this issue is. Like, okay, let's say that, and I suggest in this case that the problem would be an infectious protein, a prion. I said a prion disease is very hard to cure. It's not contagious. They emailed the parameters said it had to be very hard to cure, not contagious. You're probably going to die. But in some way, knowing the cause of this may actually be able to help you identify the cure. So that was the work through that I did with them, and then gave them the dialogue for that. The biggest one would be, I had one of these in season 3 and also one in season 4, would be sort of a season-wide arc, which Discovery is, of course, famous for that, right? The season-wide arc. So, for example, I'll use season 4 as the example rather than 3. For season 4, they brought me in like really early. This was like almost 2 years before the episodes came out.
Wow.
It was really so, I mean, it's funny. So the kind of stuff that sometimes when I see the episode later, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We did say that. It's been so long. I don't remember.
Yeah.
They said they wanted to have some truly alien aliens, and we're going to call them the 10C. And we need to have the process associated with figuring out how to communicate with them. It can't just be a universal translator. It probably shouldn't even be vocal. Like, what should we use? And random things got tossed up here. We're saying, like, what about gravitational waves? It's like, oh, please don't use gravitational waves. That's way out there. Don't do that. So for that one, for example, I said, like, why don't we use, and after there were some ideas that got thrown out. I'll tell you some of those if you want. Some ideas got thrown out that we didn't use. one of was chemical communication. That was the one we actually went with, was chemical communication. I said, this is common in the animal kingdom. I don't think I've seen it in any Star Trek where people are actually using chemical communication that's not just like a fly or something like that. And this would work in the context of, say, hydrocarbons. It's a simple means of getting this to work. And it worked out like some of the specific dialogue around it. Also worked a little bit with the VFX person in terms of what it would look like. They initially had this very simple like methane thing. And I was like, no, so that's a fart. You can't use that. You need something to use. So it's a lot more complicated than that. So it could actually be used for. And we talked about how it would be interfacing with the light things and stuff like that. And they also, to their credit, it's not a solo effort, right? So they brought in some linguists. There are 2 linguists who work with METI, and they were the ones who talked about the whole changing that into the Linkos language, this mathematical language, and translating it. So credit to them. I was there in the calls when they talked about that, but I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but good. Whereas, they were doing the same thing for me in terms of the hydrocarbons. So it's a fun partnership. And what I really love about it is with the discovery writers in particular, they were really excited about understanding the science. And I remember hearing Michelle Paradise give talks later. So I would explain to her stuff, and I do it a couple of times because she's not a biologist, right? But I remember her later explaining like the difference between an atom and a molecule and what a hydrocarbon is. I remember her then, after I'd gone through it with her a few times, her in a later call explained to somebody else. I was like, that was spot on.
That's cool.
Good job. That's exactly
That's really
right.
cool.
Right? And then
You educated people.
right? And I remember one of them, it wasn't Michelle, so somebody else told me, like, oh man, your job is so cool. I'm like, you write Star Trek. Don't tell me about cool jobs. I'm sorry. You have the coolest job there is. Full stop.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cool jobs, though, you're a professor, and I, as a parent who has a child who's in middle school, it is the coolest thing ever when they come home from school and they're just absolutely psyched about something they learned.
Yes.
And they don't just give me and my wife a general description. Ins and outs of it. It could be history. It could my daughter is having a growing interest in science, which is really cool too. But she is starting to describe things in certain ways, and my son does it too, where you just go, man, I'm so grateful for that teacher who just made this come alive for them. Because it just feeds into a desire to learn, a desire to explore, a desire to think adventurously about learning. And I just want our listeners to know, of course, if they know Dr. Mohamed at all, have seen him anywhere, he smiles nonstop and is truly excited about this subject of Star Trek and biology and his work in both worlds. So, sir, I thank you for all the work you do to educate and inspire other people. It means a lot to us parents.
And can I interject there with the whole smiling and obviously having a passion for it? When we were on the Star Trek cruise, my non-Trek spouse was there with me, and he chose to go more to the various science talks. He really enjoyed all the science talks. So he saw you like 2 or 3 times, and he loved all the science talks. You and Dr. Aaron, you guys were great. And so for anyone who's listening who maybe is not Star Trek, but finds himself in a science fiction way and sees Dr. Noor, go see Dr. Noor. He's very inspiring.
You guys are so sweet. You guys are so sweet. Well, I have to give a shout out to K-12 teachers and jocks. You mentioned that earlier, Brian, in your comment too. I mean, there's somebody out there who's so inspiring. Like my son, for example. I mean, he has always loved computer science, and he's had some computer science teachers he loved too, which is fine. But I remember in high school, he took an economics class, a macroeconomics class. Every night he'd come back talking about it. He was really excited. And since then, he's actually decided, I think I'm going to get a minor in econ. I'm like, more power to you, man. That's good. But I love, like you said, that some teachers just like get people really excited about a topic and just really want them, or get them to want to learn more on their own, as opposed to just, this is what I need for the test. Okay, now hit delete and move on.
Right.
Well, let me ask this. Have you ever had any of your students that you had come up to you at a Star Trek convention or some other way and come up to you and say thank you? Because, and this is a real story, when my youngest daughter graduated from high school, I asked her, who do you want to invite to your graduation? And she said she wanted her kindergarten teacher because she set her on the direction of education. And when she showed up at the campus for graduation, students who had her as a kindergarten teacher recognized her and treated her like a rock star. Wow. So have you had that pleasure of your students coming up to you at some event, surprising you and just thanking you for setting them on the direction of education that they took?
Well, that intersection is not very large in the sense of like students I've taught in the college classroom and then showing up at a sci-fi convention. That intersection is not very large. Okay. I have had students who've taken my class show up and say something. Never quite the like I set them on the track. Never anything quite that. I have had obviously some students who've been very wonderfully grateful and kind and effusive, which obviously means the world to me. But at a Star Trek convention, that's a small overlap group. There's probably like a total of 4 who've even been at the event. Especially right now,
mathematically possible, but who knows? It may happen. It may happen one day.
It's true. It's tough because most of the college students I've had have been in the dead era, right? In terms of Star Trek, like most of them. We're in college, like, I haven't been a professor that long, but you figure from 2005 to 2017, there was no Star Trek on TV, unless you're watching reruns. So that's a huge fraction. And even with 2017, like, it's on CBS All Access. Who was getting that? Not very many people. Even now with Paramount Plus, it's a little bit better. I mean, people have started to get it, but so I teach a class right now at Duke. It's called Genetics Evolution Star Trek, right? It's a non-majors class. And when I poll the people before they come in, and like, how many of you have watched Star Trek? Vast majority have seen none or maybe 1 or 2 of the Chris Pine movies.
Then why did they take the class?
Why are they taking the class?
Yeah.
It's an interesting natural science class with a narrative, So it checks off that natural science credit. So there are usually, some people are there's a couple who are intended biology majors and they want a soft intro. Others are like, I need a natural science credit. This sounds interesting. I'll try that and see what it is.
That's fair.
So it's very interesting then introducing them to Star Trek, because I have to start and I have to explain, like, what is the Federation and how is that different from Starfleet and who is Kirk? Like these things that sound really basic to us who've been Star Trek fans for a long time. They're starting to like ground zero. And again, a few know Kirk from the Chris Pine movies, but a lot just know nothing.
Where do you start them off? Where do you tell them to start watching Trek?
Well, I don't necessarily tell them to watch it. So we do it. Okay. The course is framed in the context. So I use the book you mentioned as a textbook for it. So what we do is I frame it in order based on concept. So like, well, today we're going to talk about this, and then we'll watch an episode or a part of an episode. And what I'll do is right before the episode starts, I'll give them a little bit of context. Like, okay, today we're going to be doing Enterprise, and you guys saw an original series before. This is now set earlier, so. People are a little scared of transporters, and so I'm trying to give them a little bit of the context as we go into it.
Should be.
But, right. They should totally be. Those are death machines. But give them like a 3-minute intro for it. Often, you can just kind of go in and just enjoy the story, especially if you're just trying to pull the science out. It's not like you need to know the specifics about how Dax is a trill and there's a slug inside her belly. Like, you don't need to know that for the science aspect, because that's not the focus.
So does that work? That whole concept of you've got like the 2 sentient species merging, because we have parasites in our real universe. There are things, hosts and parasites, but sentient hosts and parasites working together. Does that make sense? Does it make sense?
It's never fully explained. So, the question that's always bugged me, and I know I'm not answering your question, right, with this question back to you. The question that's always bugged me is, how did that association start? Right? Like, did the first slug go into the first like humanoid? Like, where did this process, like, was the humanoid swimming in something and the slug came and was kind of like a leech on its back?
Or did they co-evolve their sentience?
Maybe. Well, it's tricky because does the whole progenitors thing apply to the trill? I guess it does. So it certainly seemed like the way it was framed in the most recent season of Discovery. It seemed like Trill were probably part of that whole thing, which I don't know.
I've never thought of that. Now
so many questions of that.
I've never thought of that. Who is the first joint Trill and slug? And my kids, my son in particular, we're talking about that for some reason. I don't know if I was watching a Deep Space Nine episode or something. He was so freaked out by that whole notion. He's like, he could not grasp how this big slug could be inside of somebody and how it could have feelings and it could go on from person to person and live this huge long life. It was hysterical. The conversation was hysterical.
The big parts are okay in the sense, like, could you have something slug-like that's sentient? I guess. Could you have a humanoid sentient? I guess. Now, the tricky thing is, like you said, how do you merge those two things? Yeah. And again, it wouldn't have been in one shot, right? This would have to have been some sort of evolutionary process over time that would evolve, as you said, some sort of co-evolution. But I would love to know what those steps are. Like, did it initially just attach to its back, and then I guess I'll just leave it? I don't know, or something like, I don't know.
Now I'm a 2XL all of a sudden.
Eventually there was some connection to the nervous system, I guess. I don't know.
And not just Star Trek, but other franchises like Star Wars and other series and whatever, when you're watching them and you see a new alien that appears and you go, nah, no, impossible. It can't do it. No. When they always show like, the most evil, frightening creature and they have space travel, they're able to, and you go, where's the opposable thumbs to be able to hold the hammer to do this? Do you sit
you're
there
bringing this up again, Steve.
I'm always going to bring up the opposing thumbs. But do you watch
multiple times? Pandas evolved them separately from each other.
So do you watch the show? Do you watch these things and go, no?
Honestly, I enjoyed the ride. It's fine. I mean, the example, I feel bad because every single podcast I make fun of the same TV show, but like I'll watch like CW's Flash, and which has like the science there is absolutely insane. I mean, my son would watch it with me, and even when he was in like late middle or early high school, I can't remember which, he'd be like, everything's like, yeah, whatever. It's fun.
Willing suspension of disbelief.
Exactly. I'm here for the ride. I'm not here to, I know I'm not watching Nova, so it's fine. No, what is frustrating sometimes is if there was an easy fix. It's like, if you just done blah, which would have been like trivially different, it would be fine. That actually bugs me more than if something's just completely outrageous. We're like, okay,
I agree.
That would have been really hard to fix, though. Okay, fine.
I agree. Because it's those things, to me, I always say, self-consistency within a story, within a universe.
Yeah.
And usually those easy ones, those are the ones that break from the rest of the consistency. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what are your other fandoms besides Star Trek? What else do you enjoy?
I love them all. I mean, right now I'm going through, or at least when we're taping this, I'm going through The Acolyte. I'm enjoying that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've liked a lot of the Star Wars movies and at least some of the series, not all this. I like most of them. I mean, sort of Mandalorian was great. I mean, I love Battlestar Galactica, which, I gave a talk not that long ago and somebody said, are you optimistic for the future? I said, I watch Star Trek. Of course I'm optimistic for the future. It's such an optimistic painting. If I wasn't optimistic and I wanted to have a depressing talk, I'd do it on Battlestar Galactica. Which honestly, I love that show, but oh my gosh, like you walk out of it like, oh, just feel deflated.
I just watched the first episode of Battlestar Galactica, the one that has Katie Sackhoff in it.
Yeah. The
I've never watched it. We do confession time every now and then here on the podcast, Dr. Mohamed, where we say confession, or I do. It's a self-imposed segment. I've never watched this.
Did you watch 33 or did you watch the miniseries?
The miniseries.
Oh, okay, got it.
Is what I started.
Got it.
And then
33 is the first episode, which is very good.
Okay. Whichever one where the alien shows up on the station for the first peace talk in forever,
Yeah. That's the miniseries.
Okay. And see, I don't even know. I didn't even know what I was watching. But she kills the little baby in the crib at the beginning. Like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I gotta go back and watch Star Trek. I need to.
Brian,
it's not a happy show, but but it's amazingly well done. Again, Ronald D. Moore.
I'm going to come back to it. Yeah,
Brian, you've watched one more episode than I have of the new Battlestar Galactica. I watched the original one with Lauren Green.
The 70s one. Well, actually, the guy who plays Apollo in the 70s one plays somebody in the new one.
Right? Yes,
he came Tom
back.
Zarek. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was great. Richard Hatch.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about just this last week or two doing a rewatch. So I have seen all the new Battlestar Galactica. I love it so much, but it's been a long time since I've seen it. And now my older son, he was expressing some interest. So, and I think he's old enough, he's old enough to watch it. So we might do a rewatch on that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's good.
The other thing I like is I like all the Game of Thrones and House of Dragon. I like all of those too. In fact, I sometimes use them in talks too, especially when I'm talking about like the genetics of inbreeding. There's lots of inbreeding in Game of Thrones.
Are Lord of the Rings in your repertoire then as well?
I watch them. I mean, I'm not as big a fan for those. Like those are things I've watched once, as opposed to most of the others which I've mentioned I've watched multiple times. The Lord of the Rings ones I've seen all the movies. They're fine. They're good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we recently did a look back at the original Planet of the Apes film. And the newest ones. Have you watched any of the new versions? I
have not. Okay, sorry.
Because they have taken the direction of, in the new series, that a virus is released, a simian virus, and that makes humans down and apes up. And
Interesting.
they're very good. I would recommend you to watch the new Planet of the Apes movie, which happen all to be on Disney Plus. Disney
Okay.
And
Plus,
then-
a world of entertainment. Sponsor
Yeah,
us,
watch
please.
them, and then you have to come tell us if if it makes sense, that whole virus uplifting and virus downgrading, downlifting.
I would argue one little nitpick as an evolutionary biologist: no up and down. Like chimps are just as evolved as we are because everything's been evolving for 4 billion years. So it's
Okay,
up is in the eye of the
sure.
beholder.
Well, but that's exactly it. So what is happening is, or at least how they portray it in the movie, is there's some virus
Mhm.
that enables the chimps to rapidly develop other intellectual capabilities and
Yeah.
speech and things. But at
Yeah.
simultaneously, this virus affects
inhibiting the
humans, and they're
humans once.
starting to lose their intellectualism. And I think that's why we say up and down, up and down.
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
guess
I understand.
that's obviously not correct. I think that's how they sort of said it in the movie too. But
yeah, kind of that way. It's
Yeah.
interesting because the last film that really got into that came out in 2017 before the pandemic
Oof.
hit.
Yeah.
So you're already looking at a viral infection
Yeah.
decimating the human population and very
It's
very
I mean,
close.
I don't know about the specifics on it, but I mean, in general, could you have a genetic variant that has in one genetic background a excitatory effect and another genetic background inhibitory effect? Yeah.
Mhm.
And could you have a virus that's inserting a genetic factor into these two species? Yeah. So I mean, the pieces
Mhm.
kind of work. Now, does anything like that exist? Probably not. But
Was good.
the pieces are not
Good.
insane. The pieces are not
Was
insane.
that in the Dan Brown books about that they were going to put something in the water system that in the future
Ooh.
would affect the genetics, the genes of future humans and wipe out the human race? I remember my wife telling me about it because she read the books but that not something you've ever looked into now. Okay.
And for all these things too, again, that speed of evolution thing is a big deal. So I mean, if it's something that's actually like, I mean, people they love to say mutations. I'm like, oh, please don't use mutations because it's very hard to have the same mutation in a whole bunch of different people, right? Who are currently alive. That's very hard to do. I mean, that would take very careful genetic engineering, not just a virus got released or something like that. Now, what does work a little bit better is if it's something in terms of which genes are turned on or off. Like if it's this set of genes responds to age,
a certain protein.
like that. Yeah, exactly. That works better. So that's more the epigenetic sort of area. That works a little bit better.
I'm very close to that because my oldest daughter was born perfectly fine, and my youngest daughter was born with a genetic birth defect. And when we saw the geneticist after she was born and she met us and she said, well, what's your background? And she said, oh my God, how in the world did you match up that you would have, both my wife and I would have the recessive gene and the protein to release it for our second daughter? She's 35 and she's great and I love her.
Great.
But it's just one of those things where you don't know that this genetic message is going to change the makeup of the person.
Fair point.
And yeah, so again, and isn't that it's something disgusting about gene therapy going forward to correct some potential?
Yeah, gene therapy is interesting because I mean, if you're talking about actually editing a gene, not just like turning on or off what's already there, right? That's very interesting. Obviously, this is something that comes up a lot in Star Trek too, especially when you're talking about like the augments and all these things, or Dr. Bashir or whatever.
Exactly.
I mean, we have the technology to do things like that. I mean, the genetic editing is something that's been around for, more than 20 years, right? So, I mean, people have been doing that. So not necessarily with humans, of course, but I mean, the principle is the same. Right? The approaches that are used with a fruit fly often, not always, but often can be used with, say, a human embryo, maybe, obviously it's easier to try out with a whole bunch of fly embryos. And if it only works 1 in 100th of the time, it's not a big deal. With a human, that's a little more problematic.
Well, I even think Barbara Streisand had her dogs, she had a dog that passed away and she had that basically clones created of the dogs.
Cloning is easier. That's much easier than genetic editing because then you're just taking what's there and just pulling it out and putting it someplace else. But the actual editing, obviously, like the ethics there are huge, right? Because I mean, nobody would have a problem. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Very few people would have a problem with I'm going to do this edit because if I don't do this edit, then this baby will die at the age of 2 months. Very few people would say that's controversial. Like, okay, what if it's not 2 months? What if it's 25? Well, okay, that's a little weird. Okay, what if it's like you'll die very abruptly at the age of 85. Like that's past the normal lifespan. I mean, hopefully most people live to be 85, but I mean, a lot of people don't. Okay, what if it's not death? What if it's you're only going to have one arm? Again, most people say it's okay. Well, what if it's you're going to be less attractive? Is that necessarily less okay? I mean, they're both complications.
What I find.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. You go.
I was just going to make a note because I like noting such things. I think this is the first time we've ever mentioned Barbara Streisand on the Big Sci-Fi podcast. So I just wanted to make that note. I don't know.
My memory is telling me something else.
I would trust your memory over mine any day.
We need a spreadsheet on this, Adina. Okay, we can start tracking this.
What were you going to say? It sounds much more interesting than mine.
Maybe. Well, because what also I find very interesting, because I have a little personal, I guess, history or something with genetics, because I was an egg donor. And when I was an egg donor, this was in I would say the relatively early-ish days of genetic testing. And especially because I self-reported as I'm Jewish, that kind of, I got more genetic testing because they are trying to ensure that if someone else is choosing my eggs, that they don't match up with stuff that could cause a problem.
Yeah, there's some diseases that are more common in Ashkenazi backgrounds, for example. So fair.
Yep. Which is I don't have it. I don't have any of those markers, but the point is, it's very interesting that there are these different things in our society where two people can just do the thing and have a baby. But then there's this segment of when you get donors involved and all of that, then you are very testing, and you can be denied to be a donor, or it does affect who you choose. And I have this on both ends because I was both an egg donor and a recipient of a sperm donor for my older child. So, so it's really interesting that we kind of have, I guess, all this ability, but we don't say people go and they just go ahead and have babies without testing and then find out things afterwards.
Yeah, that is a fascinating point. Yeah.
What are the ethics potentially there? Like if I'm going to say date a new guy, I'm happily married, but if I was going to date someone, should I be should we get genetic testing? And weren't back in the day, wasn't blood testing I feel like my parents had to get blood tested before they got married.
I feel like I remember hearing this too. You did?
Yeah, I did. When my wife and I were going to get married, this is back in 1981. And one of the things was you had to have a blood test done.
What were they testing for?
I don't recall. That was 43 years ago.
In love.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. But it was just, that was a requirement to have a blood test done.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
We'd have the ability to tell a lot from that now. I mean, you could say if you two have a kid, then there's a 1 in 4 chance that they're going to have the ApoE4 variants to give you Alzheimer's, or there's 2 BRCA variants to give you breast cancer, or whatever. There's a lot of things that we can't do. Now, honestly, there's not that many big effect ones. There's some. There's not that many big effect ones. There's a lot of small effect ones. So if you do 23andMe and these things, they'll tell you all stuff. Oh, you're a little bit more likely to have Crohn's or something like that. It gives you a whole bunch of stuff like that. A lot of those things, especially when you do them from these sort of direct-to-consumer companies, it's you have 4 times the normal risk. And then 4 times normal risk means it's from 0.1% to 0.4%. Okay, that's 4 times the risk, but it's still barely a risk at all. There are exceptions. Again, the BRCA ones for breast cancer, that's a big exception. If you have 2 of those variants, then it's I forget the number, but something 60 or 70% likely you're going to have some sort of cancer. That's
a very good friend of mine, his daughter had terrible abdominal problems and no one could figure it out. And she had a 23andMe, done that testing, found out that she carried the Mediterranean flu gene in her. Once they figured that, they knew how to treat her. And after that, she was fine.
Wow. Okay, that's a case
where there was a really big thing that came out of. So they were big proponents of if you do that, you can find things out. So again,
for other people, it's just actually.
Most of the time it's oh, you've got a cousin who's living here or whatever, like that. Yes.
Yeah. But I always say if you're worried about that, see a genetic counselor. They are going to do a much more thorough and much more detailed job than 23andMe will ever do for you or any of these companies. Definitely go genetic counselor, licensed too.
Yeah.
But that's good. I'm glad it worked out for your friend.
It is. She ended up having a child and happy life because she was able to know they knew what to do and how to treat it.
That's awesome.
So very interesting. Here we go with our tangents, kids.
Yeah. Well, can
This
I ask?
This is a very related tangent. This isn't
Yeah,
super
yeah,
I guess
tangent.
so.
very interesting. This can I ask a nerdy Star Trek question?
Oh,
Dr.
100%. I love those.
What do you have favorite episode or episodes or favorite
terms of
series
science or just in
you'd care
general?
to share? Just in general. Just in general.
I mean, I don't know that the ones I would pick are going to be ones that are very different from what other people pick, right? I mean,
That's okay.
There's a lot of great, like say Deep Space Nine episodes, for example, that are classic. The what's the one where Cisco basically has that Romulan killed off, so he can get the I guess Romulan killed off to bring the Romulans into the I forget the name of the episode.
Pale Moonlight.
In the
That's
Pale
what my
Moonlight, thank
poster
you.
is
I mean,
behind me.
Oh my god, yeah. Amazing episode, right? Or Far Beyond the Stars, again, another great episode. Or the off
All the Ferengi episodes.
All the Ferengi episodes, yes. Especially what's the one at Area 51?
Oh, that's so fun. Little Green Man.
Little Green Man. Actually,
that's hilarious.
Really good too.
I love that one. It's hilarious.
Yeah. No, there's so many good ones. What's the one? It's also the one where Jake Sisko growing up over time.
Yeah, The Visitor.
The Visitor. That's it. I was going to say. I remember that's something. I can't remember what the next word was. Yeah.
Well, what did you think
I
about
love that you're saying Deep Space Nine too. That's my jam.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, what about the Enterprise episode in the fourth season where they clarify why Klingons have no ridges and some have ridges, and it was all based on the augments geneticism getting in there and all that.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Enterprise, I mean, the ethics one I loved was Damage in third season.
Oh, yes.
That's a stab in the heart sort of thing. Like,
we actually had on our show the author of that particular episode, Phyllis Strong, and it was really a powerful episode.
Very powerful. Oh my gosh! No, I mean all the series have some great ones. I mean, it's hard to pick like just one or two.
That's true. Well, what about? So I'm gonna not a tangent, but there's another question that I was curious about. Going back a little bit to students and teaching and everything like that. What general advice do you tend to give students who are interested in exploring either biology, genetics, evolution? What do you like to tell them?
Yeah. So it depends on when you say exploring, do you mean just to read on their own, or do you mean that they want to go into this field as career-wise?
Looking to go into these kinds of fields as a career.
Okay. So if I'm talking to a college student specifically, and they want to go into this field, I mean, what I say is take as many classes as you can, and more importantly, get into a research lab. I mean, if you want to go on and get, and pursue a PhD in genetics or any sort of related field, the more research experience you can get, the better. Because it gives you a better idea of what the job is actually like, and you're going to need that to get accepted into. Well, I should say you need it, but it will give you a huge advantage for going into, say, like graduate school for a PhD program or something like that. So getting involved in research as early as possible, and it's fine, especially if you're, let's say, an early stage undergrad. You could sample a couple of labs. You can go meet with a professor, chat with them, and maybe like say, can I shadow for a little bit, just see what it's like here. You don't necessarily have to commit like in the beginning of your first year and stay there through the end of your senior year. No, you could hop around a little bit, but I like to say it's good to have a long research experience. So if you can find something by the time you're, like, say, partway into junior year and stay in that same lab through your senior year, then you can actually have a real project, not just I was in the room when blah happened, but you actually did some of the science there. So that's my biggest advice.
Are there paths for students who might not be that academic minded and not interested in a PhD track, but want to just go and get an undergraduate degree? Are there paths for them to like work?
The class is just available to them, so they can just take the classes. There are classes online. I even have one online in Coursera, which is free. So if you go to Coursera and search for Introduction to Genetics and Evolution, I have just a general introduction to that class, and people can check it out and see if they like it and see if it's interesting. There's a whole bunch of more advanced ones too. I mean, mine's very intro level. There's some more advanced ones, so it's easy to learn on your own that way. And obviously, like reading's huge.
Yes,
for everything.
Absolutely. Okay. Guys, do you have any other questions? We're getting close to the end of our time.
I can't stop smiling because the doctor's smiling so much.
I'm smiling because I'm with you guys. So it's mutual.
That's very kind.
I love it.
Adina did have an interesting question on her, which is, was there a favorite con moment when you were at one of the cons, and was there a weirdest con moment? So I like to hear that. Let's hear if you anything like that. I like those questions.
So people asked me. I remember one time somebody said, like, what's the most dramatic thing that happened with you, like at a con or something like that? And in one of the Star Trek cruises, I think this was the cruise in 2022, I believe it was. Somebody came up to me and they had their, I don't remember what it was from 23andMe or my ancestry.com or something like that. They had their data. And they said that they didn't know who their dad was. They narrowed it down to two people who were brothers, right? They didn't know which one it was. Both of those people had passed and they had descendants from these two people who were brothers. And they said, is there any way you could look at this and figure it out? And I took it and I messed with it for a while. And there was just a lucky coincidence that by virtue of who the descendants were from each one, I was actually able to be like, oh, it's this one for sure. It actually worked out. So it was really neat to be able to be like, that's your dad.
Wow.
It was just
That's
a lucky
amazing.
thing by virtue of the way, like the specific descendants she had. It actually, it sorted out in a way that it was actually fun. It was extra because they're brothers, right? So like there was a lot of overlap there, but there was one particular aspect of it, which I don't want to go into specifically. There was one particular aspect which like, this one. Got it.
Wow. I mean, when you told them that information, what was the reaction? I mean, did they break down in tears?
She thought it was probably that one, and she told me that. She's like, it's probably that one, but it could be this one. And I looked, I was like, nope. I mean, it wasn't like on the spot. Like I had to take it home, and I was looking at it, and I was trying to think, well, wait. So the dad would only give the X to the daughter, and then I was going through basically all these different things, trying to follow how it would work. And I was like, this is the one.
Amazing.
That's really cool.
That was cool. That was probably my biggest, I'd say, con moment. Like, wow, talk about helping somebody. Whoa.
That's a definite favorite. Is there now a weird one, like when someone came up and they asked you a question, you went, what?
I don't know. I feel like that falls under weird too. Like, Dr. Noor, who's my dad?
That's true. That's true.
The first,
actually, Are you my father? Is this a book where you had Dr. Seuss write a book for you? Are you my father now?
When I first wrote the book, so the contract I had with Princeton University Press, who's the publisher for the book, the contract I had said I was supposed to write the book and also come give a public talk at Princeton. It's fascinating giving that public talk there because there were the people who were there in the audience. There was like Peter and Rosemary Grant, who they studied like Darwin's finching. They're like very, very esteemed evolutionary biologists. They were there in the audience. And there were other people in the audience who were like, I've seen aliens. They've come to visit. And I was like, whoa, that's this is a broad audience.
Now that's weird.
That's very rude too.
Awesome. Actually, I want to turn back on the questions to you, Adina. I mean, as somebody who's like an expert in STEM, what advice would you give somebody who wanted to go into, say, like aerospace engineering or something like that?
Well, so a lot of the students I wind up talking to, one is we wind up talking a lot about, grades, and I try to dispel the myths that you have to be a perfect, straight A student and you have to love math, because that's usually what a lot of people assume. And then when they aren't a straight A student and they don't love math, they think then I'm out. There's no path for me. So a lot of what I'm doing is just trying to get past that to show them that no, you don't have to be a perfect student. No, you don't have to like math. You might have to get through a couple, just pass a few classes, but that's different from being excellent at it or loving it. That there's, so much else that's happening in STEM that those are not requirements. I would say that would be at the top of the list right now.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Well, okay. I think we're going to probably end there. So, and that will let that bring us to the end of today's enlightening journey. Thank you so much, Dr. Noor.
Thank you for having me. It's a fun conversation as always.
Absolutely. So yeah, we have been through the realms of some science and some science fiction with Dr. Mohamed Noor. I think we've traversed topics from, the intricacies of genetics in Star Trek and the real world. We talked a little bit of ethical considerations and whatnot. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and helping to ignite our imaginations.
Thank you for doing the same with me.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent. So thank you, listeners, once again for tuning in to the Big Sci-Fi Podcast. As always, keep in mind that you can interact and chat with us on our Facebook group or find us on Instagram or Twitter. Or you can drop us a note at thebigscifipodcast@gmail.com. Now, make sure to check out our show notes. We'll have links to Dr. Noor's work, including his book and I guess the course. And until next time, keep exploring the universe around you and beyond. While you do, always remember to extend kindness, respect, and understanding to all beings across the galaxy. Live long and prosper, and join us next time here at the Big Sci-Fi Podcast.
Coconut.